8-bit joystick.
8BitDo makes some really high quality controllers for retro gamers, and I've picked up quite a bit of them over the years. So I thought I would show them off and talk about each one. So I have 10 8BitDo products to show you and quickly review. They make great controllers, but curse their confounding naming scheme with similar numbers for different products. First off is the 8BitDo N30 2.4G wireless gamepad for original NES. Now, this is an incredibly close recreation of the original NES gamepad, but in a wireless form and with turbo buttons. Now, this is as close to the original Nintendo NES as they could get without being sued by Nintendo. It has a really tight gamepad with a divot in the middle and arrows. The start and select buttons are rubber and it is perfect. And there are concave A and B buttons which are horizontal in the proper place. There are really nice square edges and it actually feels quite good in your hand. The black turbo buttons are above the A and B buttons, and there's a home button which I'm not really sure what that actually does. Now, this works via a receiver that you plug into your original NES or NES clone, and it charges via micro USB or USB-B on the top, and this has a built-in wireless battery, and I've used it for years. I use one with my AV Famicom and my retro USB AVS or my original NES. This is a really excellent modern controller for original NES hardware. A really necessary upgrade, and having it based on 2.4G wireless means that it works like a champ and there's no lag and no syncing problems. I love it, and you can now get it in transparent black, but the original is as close to the design language of the original NES. This is a really great upgrade for original NES fans out there. This is the 8BitDo SN30 2.4G wireless gamepad for original SNES/Super Famicom. That being said, you might be wondering, wow, that is a pretty great controller for the original NES, but wouldn't it be cool if they made a similar high-quality gamepad for the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom? That is where the 8BitDo SN30 2.4G wireless gamepad for original SNES/Super Famicom comes in. So it has a form factor that is really close to the original Nintendo design, but it's angled to be a little thicker towards the top, and that actually makes it pretty ergonomic. So on the left is a very tight gamepad, which feels like a Nintendo OEM. Again, it's got rubber buttons for start and select, and regular buttons that are colored like the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom. I actually have two versions of this, both in gray that I use with my Super Famicom, and transparent black that I use with my Hyperkin systems. And the A and B buttons are round and the X and B are convex. It's a little different, but you can actually feel it, and it has really nice L and R buttons on top. It charges by a USB-B or micro USB, and it syncs with the Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, or clone system via a 2.4G wireless receiver. Analog included this on their FPGA Super Nintendo systems. So while the original is one of the best upgrades that you can get for your original Nintendo, this is one of the best upgrades that you can get for a Super Famicom or Super Nintendo that doesn't break the aesthetic, and it's incredibly useful. So I originally got one of these, which is an 8BitDo retro receiver for Super Famicom/Super Nintendo, and it lets you use any Bluetooth controller on your Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, and it syncs by holding down a button in the front. And it works, but once I found out that there was a dedicated 2.4G wireless version available, I decided to go in that direction. But this lets you sync controllers to original hardware. So if you wanted to, you could use this with the arcade stick to play Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo, which is pretty dope. Next, we probably have my favorite controller that they have ever made, which is the 8BitDo SN30 Pro Bluetooth Gamepad. this sucker works with absolutely everything. Now, it is a PlayStation-style controller that they crammed into the form factor of an original Super Nintendo controller. So this sort of is the mythical child of the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation in my mind. So on the left, you have a really good D-pad, which has a little circle in the middle, but they went with little indentations instead of an arrow. The start and select buttons are rubber, all convex buttons for the A, B, and XY arranged in a diamond formation, and then two really good Hall effect clickable analog sticks down on the bottom that lets you play digital controls or analog controls, and the ergonomics work. The analog doesn't get in the way of the digital controls or vice versa. And then you have a star and heart button, which are used with the Nintendo Switch. So not only does the design language of this controller work for Super Nintendo and PlayStation, but the Nintendo Switch as well. On the bottom, there is 4 LED indicators for showing which one it's being used for. And on the top, you have L and R buttons and L2 and R2 buttons. But they're not analog triggers. But the feel of this is pretty darn good, and you could totally play a first-person shooter or fighting games that require good response from button presses on the top. And you also have a sync button and USB-C charging port. This works via Bluetooth, but they moved to a USB-C port for their charging options. I used to primarily use this controller with my RetroPie, and then I started using it with my analog pocket dock. And now that they updated the firmware so that this works great with a Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm using it for that now. So I actually got a comment this week from a German gamer who has small hands, and she actually thought that the Nintendo Switch 2 was a little too big for her taste. So I suggested that she go with this particular controller. It really is incredible that they're able to cram this much tech into this form factor, and it works and it feels good. The 8BitDo SN30 Pro USB is a workhorse, and it's cheaper than its Bluetooth sibling. So it is corded and connects with a USB cord, but by doing it, it works in instances where nothing else will actually work. It is incredibly compatible, and I use it with my RetroPie. Apparently, this also works with the Switch 1, but I haven't been able to get USB controllers working with my Switch 2. But I'm happy to keep using this with my RetroPie. Bluetooth and wireless is all nice, but sometimes you simply want to go with something that works, where a good old direct USB connection comes in handy. This is the 8BitDo NEOGEO wireless controller. So they did the impossible thing that SNK attempted to do with the NEOGEO Mini and fell flat. They actually recreated the NEOGEO CD controller with the clicky D-pads and the little control stick on the left, which is clicky, and you could hear it as you move around, and this is what NEOGEO fans were clamoring for with the NEOGEO Mini, which had an analog controller. This is a really dope controller. On the left, you have this clicky thumbstick, which they brought into a modern controller, and it has start and select buttons, and then the little Nintendo Switch buttons down here, and then the A, B, C, D buttons that are, again, based on the SNK NEOGEO CD design. L and R buttons on the top, and a USB charging port, and a sync button with little LED indicators. And on the back is a switch for choosing between a USB dongle for 2.4G wireless connection or Bluetooth. Now, this choice lets you choose which systems you're going to connect it to. I'm actually using this via 2.4G USB connections on my RetroPie, and I use this in place of arcade sticks because it's got that nice and clicky stick for fighting games, and it works for me. And you can actually use this on a NEOGEO Mini if you take the USB-A dongle and then connect it to a USB-C adapter But it's ridiculous that it's giving you this many options. And it's ridiculous that I have this many controllers, but my dad told me that you got to use the right tool for the right job if you want it done right. This is the 8BitDo M30 Bluetooth Gamepad. So if the prior controllers were love letters for the works of SNK and Nintendo with the Super Nintendo and the regular NES, the 8BitDo M30 is a love letter to the gamepads of Sega. Now, it has a D-pad which invokes the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive with big spaces for diagonal movement and a circular design, and the shape of the controller actually invokes the Sega Saturn, especially the Japanese one, or the redesigned Sega Genesis 6-button gamepad. And for the buttons, they have A, B, C all in a row with big convex buttons, and XYZ on top, but the two different sizes of buttons invoke the 6-button controller of the Sega Genesis. L and R buttons are on the top, and a start button in the middle, and Nintendo Switch style buttons for the star and minus and a heart button towards the bottom of the face of the controller, and there is an LED indicators on the bottom. And on the top, you have a USB-C port for charging and a sync button. Overall, this is a super comfortable controller, and it's one of the best feeling gamepads that I've ever used. Now, the company did make a 2.4G wireless version, but this one is based on Bluetooth, and I got it to exclusively work with the analog pocket dock. So it's a little bit of an overkill, but I can play Sega games and arcade games, and I got a really good experience with this bad boy. This brings me to this old beast right up here, the 8BitDo arcade stick. This controller is what the NES Advantage wanted to be when it grows up. Obviously, it's a big fight stick, but it's stylized after the NES Advantage, but it's scaled up. This is what the NES Advantage felt like when you were a kid, but it has a clicky, ergonomic joystick and is really, really well built. On the right, it has a ball-top arcade stick, which you can swap with an American bat-style arcade stick if you so desire. And on the front, there are a total of 8 arcade-style buttons. And it's also highly moddable. So if you want to put in Sanwa buttons, you can do it, but the stock buttons work for me. So there are actually lights on the black face paint that light up and show you which particular configuration of the buttons that you have. And that's important when I talk about the S and the X switch on the upper left. The S mode is for Nintendo Switch, which has B before A. And the X mode has A before B. And then there is a switch to have the stick function as the D-pad, the left stick, or the right stick. And then there are home and function buttons. And then there is a toggle between Bluetooth and 2.4G wireless modes. And this comes with a 2.4G wireless adapter and a USB-C port for charging and wired communications. And there's also a Player 1 and Player 2 macro buttons, but they are inset and not accidentally hit. Luckily, I got this at Hawthorne Game Exchange, and I got it used and it was kept in really excellent condition. Now, this joystick just got a firmware update that enabled Nintendo Switch 2 support via Bluetooth, and I can use it with my Nintendo Switch 2, my analog pocket dock via X mode and Bluetooth, or X mode and 2.4G and use it with my Raspberry Pi. So it's great that this one arcade stick can be used on so many different systems. This thing is just super delicious when you play some arcade games, and it really takes it to the next level in delivering a nostalgic feel in your hand. And it's not cheap, and I'm glad that I got it used, but oh man, is it awesome. This is the 8BitDo N30 2.4G wireless mouse. So I have a mouse and keyboard to talk about, and the 8BitDo mouse is a strange beast. It is both boxy and curved, and it has a design language that invokes the NES controller with 2 red buttons on the front and a D-pad on the left-hand side. And all the buttons are a little convex, which is different to modern mice, which usually have a clickable area instead of a distinct button. Now, there is an invisible touchpad right between the buttons, which acts as a scroll wheel. On the left, the D-pad can function with a variety of options. So there is software to map it on Windows, but not on a Macintosh. And since I'm a Mac OS user, I'm just using it as a page down and page up, but it works for me. It connects via 2.4G wireless, and it comes with a little USB dongle. And it is powered by a AA battery, and I definitely would have liked a version with a built-in rechargeable battery. It definitely has a retro feel that invokes the earliest mouses of the 1980s. It definitely took me a while to get used to it, but once I got accustomed to it, I wouldn't want any other mouse. Believe it or not, the 8BitDo Retro Mechanical Keyboard was one of my most popular hardware reviews I have ever done. And one of the most common complaints with my previous review is I didn't record enough sound of the clicking, so I made a second video with just that. This is the first mechanical keyboard that I've owned in 3 decades. It's pretty big, but it's pretty full of features, and it is a full fat milk of keyboards. It is an absolute pleasure to use. It actually has switches and knobs on the top, both for turning it on and putting it into different modes. And in the modern era of touchscreens, there's just something decadent about having real buttons. Now, this has a built-in battery that is charged via USB-C, but I've only had to charge it about once every couple months of regular use. And I frequently forget to turn it off, but it goes to sleep and wakes up quickly. It can connect via 2.4G wireless USB dongle or Bluetooth or even a USB-C cable. This lets you use it with a variety of devices, but I primarily use it with my Mac for writing video scripts and video editing. Now, if you notice, it does not have a 10-key keypad on the right for entering numbers, but it has all of your regular numbers and function keys on the top, and there's an optional 10p number pad that you can add to the keyboard, and it also ships with these really big buttons that you plug into the top of the keyboard, but I haven't used them for anything. And if you notice, I have a keyboard that is stylized after the Japanese Nintendo Famicom, and it also functions as a Japanese keyboard. And when you pair it with the 8BitDo mouse, it really adds a retro flair to your desk. And it's a good keyboard too. So if you like this video, then you should totally hit the like button because that's what it's for. And I make videos for retro video game fans each week, so you should hit the subscribe button so you don't miss them. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.